Colleagues, good afternoon. I hope everybody enjoyed the lunch, as some of us did. So this afternoon, we have 3 presentations. The good thing, they're all coming from Mzumbe. The first presenter on my immediate left, Professor Joseph Kuzilwa, is a Vice Chancellor of Mzumbe University. He'll be presenting a paper on contract farming, institutional setup, and outcomes on smallholders farmers. Will be followed by Mdee. She's a paper on just selling water. That's what we do, a very fancy title. And we have a colleague, Bahati Ilembo, will be presenting a paper on determinants of adoption of input credit tobacco contract farming. Each presenter will be given between 15 and 20 minutes so that we could save enough time for discussion. And after 15 minutes, I'll just show them the first signal. If you can try to sum up at that time, but if you present and save some few minutes, will be handy for more discussions. So without much ado, let me invite the first speaker and probably change the mic.
Good afternoon. As I've been introduced, my name is Joseph Kuzilwa from Mzumbe University, Tanzania. And before I start, I think let me also take this opportunity to thank the Bradford University and in particular the Center for Development Studies for this kind invitation, but also to appreciate the long and very beneficial relationship that we've had with Bradford University spanning more than 38 years. We really appreciate that one. Special thanks to Professor John Weiss and David Potts, I think, for arranging this very important forum talking about Tanzania. I also feel especially privileged to meet well-renowned personalities who have special interest in Tanzania. And this morning I was taken aback more than 40 years listening to my professor Andrew Kuson giving a good class on political economy. Reminded me of those dynamic days we had at the University of Dar es Salaam in the early 1970s. So thank to them all. The topic of my presentation is on contract farming, institutional setup and outcomes on smaller holder farmers, experiences from tobacco and sunflower in Tanzania. Is part of a bigger picture of a study that we are doing in Tanzania, covering a number of crops, tobacco, sunflower, sugarcane, but also cotton, where we are addressing a number of issues, including institutional setup, but also we are working on technical efficiencies, productivities, and other such things. So for this particular forum, we've just chosen this particular topic, and my colleague later on, Bahati Ilembo, whom are also working together in this project, will of course talk about the adoption issues. Let me start up front by acknowledging the financial support from the Danish Fellowship Center for funding this particular project. I think I have to say that since I'm being tapped, they must know that I acknowledge their financial support. The data that informed this paper is coming from a survey that was conducted in 2012 for the two crops, covering a number of smallholder farmers, but also a number of case studies that have also been developed, covering a number of smallholder farmers and some institutions, but also some secondary data. So it is a total of these that is informing this paper. And the objective is really simple, just to present a comparative advantage of the institutional setup and also some of the emerging effects of contract farming, looking at issues of productivity, market access, and incomes of smallholder farmers in these two crops. In terms of context, I think we want to go back to the earlier presentation, which looked at the much bigger picture of the agricultural sector, but also the marketing challenges that are facing these upstream level of these crop chains. And we are confining ourselves really to the smallholder level and not so much up the chain. My presentation will follow those 6 points. Just to get the context and the point for taking off, and has been alluded this morning, that smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and Tanzania in particular are continuing to facing a number of challenges, including that of low productivity, market access, and of course the resulting inadequate farm incomes. Of course, one can extend further to the whole question of rural poverty. Lately, however, it's been thought that by developing an integrated system of agricultural production, extensioning, and marketing, this may enable smallholder farmers to access product markets, and in particular also international product market where they can get higher value for their products and therefore be able to tackle some of these challenges. And that contract farming is seen as one of such institutional arrangement that has the potential to realize such desired outcomes, as has been explained by a number of people. The revival of contract farming in the African context, I think, is now drawing a lot of interest, research interest, but also interest from policy makers, both those who probably look at it in a pessimistic viewpoint, the effect of this on other social factors, effect on production of food and so on and so forth. For Tanzania, we are aware that since the mid-80s, the country has been undertaking significant reforms in the organizational and regulatory frameworks of the agricultural sector, all of this aiming at improving the livelihood of the small farmers. And that these have been guided by a number of policy papers and strategies. And I think the predominant among these are related, the Agricultural Sector Development Strategy of 2001, which was subsequently used to develop an action plan in terms of agricultural sector development programs, which are used as a guide for action, but also for resource use in this sector. The major issues that were captured in these strategy papers, we can divide them into two. One, strengthening of the institutional framework, covering such things as development of markets, but more importantly, the involvement of the private sector in marketing, with the government moving out of business, as was the case in the earlier period, but also working on the issue of input and credit access, all issues of how to enhance productivity, facilitation of investment, and so on and so forth. But secondly, is in terms of reforms in agricultural research and extension, and here the issue also of coming up with production packages, but also high-yielding seeds was one of the major areas of focus. Lately, as you might know, not very lately, but at least 2009, the private sector, under the leadership of the Tanzania National Business Council, initiated what was known as the Kilimo Kwanza, agricultural first, or the primacy on agriculture. This initiative was supported, of course, by government, and it emphasized the need for establishing institutional arrangement with a particular importance attached to contract farming, which was seen was one of the strategies for addressing some of the major challenges of market input access of the smallholders. One of the issues that have been stressed in Kilimo Kwanza, the output yet to be realized, is laws that will guide and protect contract farming system in Tanzania. Just to put into context a bit of the theory of contract farming, this one I think we are always familiar, but just to remind ourselves that, and quoting here Eaton and Shepard, that contract farming is a system of forward planned production on the supply of biological produce. It covers a number of conditions and issues revolving around the issue of quantity, quality, price, of course, time and place of delivery. Could be written or even in oral form. And I should say here, when I'm talking about oral form, and reminds us of the crop authorities of the 1970s, 80s in Tanzania, which had some kind of monopoly. Matter of fact, we could say that those were indeed implicit contracts, if you want, but different from the ones that are, of course, operated by currently the private sector. Our analysis for contract farming evolves through the institutional theory under the tradition of North, where institutional theory describes how institutional arrangements, rules, laws, and regulation influence human behavior. And that based on this approach, communities would establish formal or informal regulations which will enable them to manage economic opportunities and resources. And we're saying that contract farming, irrespective of which approach you're using, the principal agent theory, for example, or the recently so-called holistic approach along the tradition of Bigotov and Olsen, I think fits well this institutional approach. And we're saying it is this that be the foundation for informal or formal rules that governs production arrangements between buyers and smallholders in Tanzania. Just a bit about the typology, again, to remind ourselves that contract farming, according to the typology earlier on conceived by Miguel and Jones, but also picked afterwards by Minot 2011, that there are three types of contract, not necessarily mutually exclusive. The simplest one being the market specifying contract, where all the issue of procurement are defined, but also could involve resource provision, where the suppliers, farmers could be provided with inputs, maybe on credit, in order to produce the required amount. But it could be even more comprehensive, where it might involve production and management. Maybe one of the big questions that people have been involved with is with regards to enforceability of contract farming. According to this theory, outcome arising from economic intervention, rules and regulation, of course, depend on compliance, and that is what but that these may not happen spontaneously, and therefore the need for appropriate governance units, which have to be proactive to ensure that there is compliance or enforcement of rules by the parties involved. And therefore we're saying that appropriate economic but also governance institutional setup are important in order to ensure successful implementation of contracts. And the question we're posing then is, to what extent are the tobacco and sunflower contracts in Tanzania to what extent are they fitting in this framework. We know that traditionally, there are certain crops that are said to qualify more on contract farming. Crops with certain characteristics, evolving around issues of homogeneity of the products, perishability, quality issues where it is difficult to observe quality, particularly at the end market, that such product should be qualified under contract. But cases where farmer may not be very familiar with the production methods and market requirements. And we're saying for this kind of product, the spot markets may not be very efficient to ensure transaction because they may involve higher transaction costs and has the need, therefore, for some form of contract. Examples here, of course, like tea, tobacco, sugarcane. Lately, however, we are seeing more and more other crops being considered for production under contract, even if they don't have those what we're traditionally seeing as criteria or characteristics of products fitting contract farming. And I think as we see now, these are aimed at finding common solutions for different problems that are simultaneously faced by producers and processors. And the aim here is looking for possible win-win situations. For example, cases where there is inadequate supply of biological inputs on the part of the processing firm, but at the same time, we have inadequate production inputs or credit on the part of the producers. And I think the case of sunflower production in Tanzania is one of these new experiences, having started only in the late 2007. And therefore, we think it's important to look at such experiences and lessons that can be drawn therefrom. We're using this simple framework of institutional arrangement where we distinguish between economic institutional arrangements, but also the government institutional arrangements. And what we're saying is that these two must be there. Often more importance is given to the economic arrangement and ignoring the governance issues that we think are very important in ensuring success. Now, we want to use this framework to try and dissect the two contracts framework, starting with tobacco. But and this is a bit, I've tried to simplify what is probably a much more complex production situation. The tobacco production involves 3 kinds of contracts. So there's the first very simple contract involving individual tobacco farmers and the primary cooperative societies. And to produce tobacco, you must register. That is a requirement by law. You cannot engage in production of tobacco without being registered. So you have to register and be guaranteed by a farmer group. And in that very simple contract, which is normally in Swahili, it commits the farmer to sell the entire crop to the primary cooperative societies with a loan to be deducted, but also to be provided with inputs. So that's a simple contract. The second contract, where the farmers are not involved directly but through representation, is the contract between cooperative societies and the buying companies. Currently, there are only 2 main buying companies, but they work through an association, ATTT, therefore forming some kind of monopsony, whereby it's like there are no options or where farmers could resort to in case they don't want to sell the tobacco in these 2 companies. And then the third contract, where the farmers are also not involved, is the contract between the cooperative union and the bank for procurement of loan for purchase of inputs. Now, there are other institutions, the Registrar of Cooperatives, which has to approve the loan, but also the District Agricultural Office, which together with the buying companies, they do extension. So what I have on the left, on your side column, are some of the economic provisions of these contracts. Just some observation on what has happened, that for tobacco, we have seen that land under cultivation of tobacco has increased threefold between 2000 and 2012, suggesting that new farmers are joining in the tobacco crop. Yield, we are seeing yield fluctuating between 600 to 1,500 kgs per hectare, but for most cases, for most years, it's below 1,000, suggesting that there is indeed potential for improvement. But that most farmers, about 2%, utilize the input credit, hence able to participate effectively in tobacco production. Just some statistics, some figures there, which shows the harvest, but also area under harvest and the yield between 2000 and 2012, but also the price between 2003 and 2012. What's interesting, I think I've put another column of the price of tobacco for Malawi. We've observed that Tanzanian farmers, I think of all the countries that are growing tobacco, are the ones who are receiving the lowest prices per kg. So it's an interesting research area as to why this is the case. But also to say that the prices even for the farmers are caught in kgs. I don't have much time. I think I'll skip a bit and look at some of the challenges as have been found in this research. And I just picked some of them. First of all, despite the fact that the tobacco contract has a very refined, detailed contract terms, and particularly those between the primary cooperative societies and the buying companies, and between the banks and the primary cooperative societies, there are no legal consequences for delaying in the provision of inputs, which may, of course, subsequently affect grades and therefore prices. The prices are based on different grades. There is premium for quality, and there are almost like 72 grades. But also, farmers' involvement in the designing of the contract is inadequate. For example, we're seeing that the farmers as a whole, they are only aware of one contract, the first simple contract, even though the other contracts affect them directly and indirectly. And incidentally, these other two contracts are in English. So that's also a challenge. But more importantly, I think as a challenge is the inadequate involvement of government, particularly in coordinating and ensuring compliance. The sunflower case is a bit simpler. As I've said, this is a much newer contract arrangement, only starting in year 2007. And it has been initiated, one by agricultural NGO, or NGOs, there is more than one, but I've just taken here one of them, the Rural Livelihood Development Corporation, which has been supported by Swiss Development Corporation, but also the private small processors, that these two, working together with the district authorities, have led into the establishment of simple contract involving smallholder sunflower farmers. In terms of the provision, as you can see, it's very simple that the provision of this contract is mainly involving on supply of improved sunflower seeds on credit at below retail prices. Normally, a kilo of sunflower seed will cost around 4,500 shillings, but farmers are able to access it at almost half the price. At times, they may involve also other services like land preparation. But then the farmers have to commit to sell the entire crop to the company with which they are signing the contract, but at spot market. So the prices are not determined ahead, but they're determined at the time of sale. Few observations, and I'll just mention only a few, that these agricultural NGOs has played a very pivotal role for making this a successful contract through farmer sensitization, capacity building, but also matchmaking between the farmers and the companies. There is now an increased participation of farmers in the contract. We're seeing that at least 15% of the households in the areas we're studying, and that is Dodoma and Singida, central part of Tanzania, have participated at least once in the contract. And as a result of this, farmers have access to improved seeds and therefore with better yield than non-contract farmers. Just a few figures here, numbers where we are comparing on a number of variables, the performance of non-contract farmers and the contract farmers. And we're seeing significant differences, for example, on the yield received, on the revenue, for example, household incomes, and so on and so forth, but also on the access to seeds. Some of the challenges, as you'd expect, the issue of side selling, because this is not a monopolistic market. Some farmers may sell if the price is higher to companies they have not signed contract with. Absence of farm organization, for example, which of course kind of weaken their negotiation powers with the contracting firms. Absence of price premium for quality, for example, and so on and so forth. We've tried to put a small table to compare the two contracts. This will be available to you later on. I see my time is over. But just to conclude, that in an attempt to address challenges of productivity and markets by smaller farmers, I think contract farming is now been given a new push, that newer crops are now being brought into contract farming, and we are seeing that this has the potential for improving both farmers but also processors' constraints. However, we think that the institutional setup should address a number of emerging challenges, making contracts as simple as possible, taking into account literacy levels, for example, minimizing confidential relationship through transparency on the contract terms, trying to build trust, for example, but also having farmer organization or producer organization who are, I think, accountable and with the capacity, I think, to participate in dispute resolution. And finally, the need for the government not to go on leave as they disengage from direct marketing, but at least to play its role at all levels as institution responsible for peace and order. Thanks so much for your attention.
I'm Mdee, and on the slide it says University of Bradford and Mzumbe University, and I should probably explain my dual association first of all. I've been with Bradford University for the last 13 years, but the first project I was employed on was with the Institute of Development Management, which became Mzumbe, and a certain economics lecturer, Faustin Kamuzora. And we did lots of field work together from that time. That led on different incarnations years later to our master's programme, our Bradford Mzumbe master's programme, which I was involved with very closely. I then spent the last year with Mzumbe in Tanzania, working in the Institute of Development Studies. And we've now won a largish DFID ESRC grant to look at local governance issues over the next 3 years. So hopefully this partnership sort of going from strength to strength. So I certainly feel I've got feet in both camps, so hence the dual association. What I want to talk about today, though, is something that I've got involved with in my year in Tanzania, is another DFID ESRC funded project. And it's a project looking at the politics of irrigation. And I think it picks up nicely some micro studies, some little ethnographies that relate to some of the macro issues that we heard about this morning, to some of the macroeconomic debates about transformation of agriculture, transformation of the Tanzanian economy. In the abstract, it said I was going to talk about one of the case studies, but I'm going to talk about both because I think that they illustrate nicely some of the bigger debates that are going on. This study is held by the University of Sussex, and my The principal investigator of that study, Elizabeth Harrison, was supposed to be here, but she was unable to come in the end. And the Tanzanian case study is one of 3 countries that's exploring small-scale irrigation, the potential for small-scale irrigation in terms of transforming smallholder livelihoods, but also looking at the challenge of climate change and adaptation. So the 3 studies are in Tanzania, Malawi and Bangladesh. I'm only going to talk about the Tanzanian case study. In Tanzania, we took two areas. Now, this is an anthropologically based study. So it's looking at micro case studies in detail. And you might say the strength, but also the weakness of anthropology is that it reveals lots of detail and it reveals lots of different complex and completing stories and narratives. So sometimes it can raise more problems than it can solve. And I think it picks up on all sorts of the things that have been mentioned this morning about things like food production, small farmer, adaptation and innovation, the politics of managing water and the politics of managing resources, and also about inequality and poverty reduction. But to just put a bit of context and policy background to this, to thinking about water, it isn't the first time that I've looked at water in Tanzania and issues of water. My PhD was about drinking water and community management of a drinking water supply project. And it looked at themes of decentralisation. How could communities manage this resource of water? How could you implement effective cost sharing? How could you ensure that people got equitable access to water? So I come from that background. So we now move to look at irrigation, small-scale irrigation. So just to look at some of that quick policy background, I won't spend too much time on this because I think that the case study material is more interesting. So we've got various integrated water resources management policies. Lots of it based on discussions around integrated water resources management. We've got a water policy in 2002, National Water Development Strategy 2005 to 15, Water Resources Management Act 2009, putting in place a legal framework for how water rights are allocated, how permits are given out for access to water resources. Water access has still been a struggle in Tanzania in terms of meeting the MDG commitments, for instance. So a recent survey suggests about 59% have access to clean water, up from about 41% in 1985. But only 10% have improved sanitation. It's off target in all areas in terms of reaching water access goals. It's tended to emphasise a decentralisation and a demand-driven approach. So the state, to some extent, has stepped back from managing drinking water supply and water supply. It's encouraged the participation of the private sector and NGOs. The water basins are essentially managed by, the water resources are essentially managed by 9 river basin offices. For example, we've been working in the area of the Wami River Basin. And water permits are issued by those offices under the Act, the 2009 Act. So there's a little map of our 9 basins. Behind the policy, we've got some social, economic and environmental principles, some of which are seen as being a little bit contradictory, so that water is both a basic need and right, and water for human consumption comes first, but also that water is an economic good. We've got lots of environmental concerns about conservation of water sources, thinking about the climate change issues that are now coming as the next challenge. But we've got some contradictory elements within the water policy, and things that will come up again in terms of the irrigation policy when we're talking about competing uses of water and commercialising investment, commercialising access to those water resources and how water permits are issued. And we'll see those come up in both case studies, which on the face of it look very different, but actually reveal some of the same tensions about who has the rights to access water. I won't go through all these principles, but there are a lot of sustainability principles built into the policy. The policy is quite sound in terms of those principles. Then to go to the irrigation policy as a subset of the wider water policy in Tanzania. So we've heard this morning about the long background of attempts to modernise and commercialise agriculture in Tanzania. It's been a recurring theme. And irrigation is seen as being a vital component of this modernisation. The irrigation policy encourages private sector investment. Irrigation is a named component in the Kilimo Kwanza, the Agricultural First Initiative. And the 2009 irrigation policy was developed responding to a 2002 irrigation master plan. So this looks at accelerating investment in irrigation schemes, increased private sector involvement in service provision, sustainable utilisation of land and water resources, effective integration with all these environmental sustainable use principles, aimed at reliable and sustainable crop production, contributing to food security, poverty reduction and the overall economic growth of the nation. So we need to just keep these principles in mind when we then look at some of the case studies about how water and irrigation projects in particular are being encouraged or funded. Won't go through this, but one of the commonly held views is that Tanzania has a lot of potential in terms of irrigation, but hasn't so far succeeded in really utilising that potential. So the National Irrigation Master Plan in 2002 identified 29.4 million hectares of land which could be used with potential for irrigation. 2.3 million hectares were classified as high potential, 4.8 as medium potential and 22.3 million hectares as low potential. However, the figures in the later 2009 policy suggest that only 289,000 hectares of that were currently under improved irrigated agriculture. That would probably be more now. There's been some more significant investment in irrigated agriculture. There's some important assumptions in the policy as well that we need to explore a bit more, because these do seem to influence how successful some of the irrigation schemes can be. Traditional irrigation, the indigenous irrigation systems, are seen in the policy as being wasteful and inefficient. There's been quite a lot of research and work done on this up in the Paré Mountains, for instance, that looks at systems of conflict resolution, water sharing systems around the more traditional irrigation schemes. I won't go into those today so much. These suggest that training the farmers on better water use, encouraging the private sector NGOs is what is needed. Then the policy encourages improved traditional irrigation, so with investment in upgrading the traditional systems, such as in the Paré Mountains. And the policy suggests that government is going to oversee the technical requirements and encourage the public-private partnerships. One of the assumptions of the policy is that water conflicts can be avoided if everybody who uses water is organised into associations. And this has been one of the parts of decentralisation, is that you push control over the water to water users associations at the local resource level. We set out to look at how this might work in practice using a political ecology approach, sort of anthropological political ecology of two case studies where irrigation was being used, but in very different ways. So firstly, the Dakawa rice farm. I'm sure those of you who've been around Tanzanian agriculture for a long time have come across the rice farm at Dakawa. We also looked at an area of the Uluguru Mountains above Morogoro called Choma. Those of you who visited Morningside will know the pathways, steep mountain terrain up in that area. As I mentioned, this is part of this 3-country study. Dakawa is interesting because it's a formal scheme. It's a large 2,000 hectare scheme. Now, this is the type of scheme that government wants to encourage the investment of more of them. We saw in big results now that Andrew was mentioning. We want large new schemes to manage irrigation. The challenge is to establish and bring in private investment while benefiting smallholders. This is within the Kilimo Kwanza policy. The commercialisation is not just about the big commercial farmers. What is also encouraged is that large schemes will be managed by cooperations of small farmers, cooperative societies of small farmers. And this is how Dakawa is now being managed. So the government promises demand-driven scheme identification. That's my own scepticism coming in there, but that management of these sort of schemes must be formalised. There's a recognition that the private sector is quite risk-averse in terms of irrigation, that land and water rights are still considered as being too risky, so that actually cooperatives of small farmers may be the way to operate some of these bigger schemes. There's a lot of US aid money being put into these sort of irrigation schemes currently. There's a very big one going in Kilombero River right now. But what the challenge is how to manage these cooperations of small farmers. So the Dakawa rice farm is formally a nationalised rice farm. It was built by the North Koreans. Was never operational at full capacity. It's an impressive place to go around. 2,000 hectares of irrigation canals, a pumping station on the Wami River. But, and I spoke to one of the former managers of the scheme, who's now a professor of water engineering at Mzumbe University, who said this had never functioned. There'd never been enough water and never enough capacity in the river to run this scheme as it could have been, as it had the potential. It's supposed to generate 2 crops of rice per year. It's now been revived. The NAFCO went bankrupt. The scheme was then revived by a group of wealthier, politically connected farmers and politicians. And they managed to revive the scheme. And they've managed to then reinvent themselves as a cooperative of small farmers who've successfully then mobilised, well, firstly Japanese money, then American money, into rehabilitating this scheme, cleaning out the irrigation canals. There's a promise of further investment by USAID to rehabilitate the pumping station, to provide new pumps. And actually there's been some success. The farm is divided into 12-acre blocks. One farmer can own a maximum of 1 block. This is the theory. In practice, many of the 900 plus members own more than that. But farmers can also be in smaller groups. So there can be small farmers here. And this is what has actually happened in practice when we start to look at what's really happening. There's some very big farmers in this scheme. And they've managed, using relatives' names, friends' names, to register multiple blocks. So they may have 120 acres of rice. But then you may also have one 12-acre block being farmed by 20 small farmers who are managing cooperatively between themselves, managing the water flows in that land. And the land and water itself is owned and managed by the cooperative society, or Kudra, on behalf of the members. They've had training, the system of rice intensification. They've had lots of funding and support from USAID. And the headline story is they've managed huge productivity gains on this land. There's a picture of the rice block. But, so the but questions, are these really small farmers? Who's controlling the land and who owns the land? We discovered a lot of conflict about who really owned the land, and one view that a lot of the small farmers were simply labourers for the bigger farmers. There was a lot of questions about who actually controls the organisation. I've got to stop now, maybe I have to have only time to do one case study. There were a lot of bigger questions about, is the scheme sustainable? There was a lot of competition for the water upstream, lots of big users, poor water use inefficiency, very high costs of power. A lot of subsidy by the donor. And although the farmers have increased production, the price of rice had halved in the year when we were asking questions. So the farmers were only at the same level of profitability. Very quickly then, in Choma, a completely different case. Small-scale, traditional farmers who had been cooperating for generations on the hillside. They'd used to use traditional furrows. They were now using hose pipes because the local government had banned the use of the furrows. The hose pipes were enabling them to have some very good food production. This is what Brown was talking about. And some of the farmers were really improving their livelihoods. They'd bought motorbikes, they were investing in their housing, they'd sent the children off to good schools, and they were doing this through vegetable selling in Morogoro and strawberry production, irrigated strawberry production, being sent on the buses to Arusha and Dar. The picky-pickies, as again Brown was talking about, the motorbikes were enabling this production to be moved up and down the mountain, where formerly it was very difficult to do so. So that's a picture of the terraces. But the problem was this wasn't what the government wanted. This activity was seen as illegal. And there was a lot of debates going on about who should be using the water. If they were using the water, they should be organised and registered as a water association. But the farmers didn't want that. They said, what's the government ever done for us? We've been managing this traditionally through our ethnic associations for years, and we manage it without conflict. I wanted to go on and talk about the conflict when the government tried to move them off the land, but I haven't got the time to do so. But I think summing up what both cases started to say to us was about this issue of the bigger hydropolitics of water and who had access to the water. The small-scale farmers in Choma, who were making quite a good living, were in danger of being pushed off their land because they were seen as illegal users of the water. And there was a whole narrative that they were disrupting the water supply to Dar es Salaam. Now, there were lots of bigger debates that actually maybe their water use wasn't that significant. And blaming the farmers was easier than blaming some of the bigger landholders and bigger institutions who were also drawing water from the Uluguru Mountains. There was the same issues about actually the river basin authorities were giving out permits for water use, but they weren't actually measuring how much water was used. And so there was no incentive to use the water efficiently. And this is where the quote comes that we titled the talk, was that from the request for an interview in the River Basin Authority was brushed off by one of our research assistants in the car park by just saying, we just sell water, that's all we do. And we do get that impression from both case studies that water rights are being sold but not controlled. And so if we're starting to think about water use for irrigation, we're going to need to think about how that water is being used efficiently. There are also some much bigger issues that we need to think about, the competing uses of water. Is the use of water in agriculture the best use for that water? There was an interesting paper recently by, I think that was from Sokoine, about the competing use of water for power generation, which of course is another very important factor within Tanzania with continuing power shortages. And then we've also got the bigger issues about, is there enough water? If we're going to go down this irrigated agricultural path, we've got the twin challenges of climate change, but at the same time, the increasing population supply. And so we're going to have the demand for the drinking water supply increasing, and irrigation water, and power. And at the moment, it doesn't appear as though there's any institutional mechanism for solving some of those bigger questions. And so I need to shut up now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm Bahati Ilembo from Mzumbe University, and I'm co-authoring this paper with my colleagues, Joseph Kuzilwa, professor, and Anne Henningsen from Copenhagen University. And the paper is about the determinants of adoption of input credit in the tobacco contract farming in Tanzania. Actually, Professor Kuzilwa have already spoken of some of the issues related to this paper. Yeah, it is drawn from the bigger project, as he said, where we are looking at the potentials and the limitations of contract farming to small farming business. Yeah, so that is the outline of the paper, where I have like 80 sections, but they are short, so I can go through them very quickly to make sure that I'm using time appropriately. So the point of departure actually should be these facts here, that we understand through the literature that many of the world's poor still directly or indirectly depend on agriculture for their livelihoods, and mostly small-scale farmers. So even this paper targets mostly these small-scale tobacco farmers. And as you can see, the emergence of contract farming and its advantages, which has been well evidenced through literature, is seen to be an alternative that can address all the deficiencies that face smallholder farmers really in developing countries, Tanzania being one of them. So it serves the poor farmers who would not otherwise be able to access remunerative agricultural markets, and also particularly the question which is being addressed here on input supply, which has been very expensive, and for smallholder farmers who are in most cases are not able to self-finance their agricultural activities, then I think through contract farming it is definitely a viable option for them. Maybe we can look a bit on Tanzania tobacco contract farming. And we are saying this has been there since independence. And the way it is, it targets main provision of agro inputs and the marketing. Professor have also mentioned earlier that through primary cooperative societies, then is where the agro inputs are being provided, mainly fertilizer and pesticides, of course, plus other minor agro inputs like packaging inputs of the sort. So we are saying the model of contracting is firm, intermediary, smallholder. So the smallholders are linked by the merchants through intermediaries. So this is the current model which is operating there in the tobacco contract farming. And the joining actually is voluntary, but the question we're asking here is why there are some farmers who choose this input credit while others do not. Though we understand the fact that expenditure on agricultural inputs must be incurred during planting and the growth period, while the returns are received several months later after harvest. Then given the financial position of these smallholders, we would expect that all of them should opt for the input credit system. But then we are asking why some of them would like to go there for the input credit and the others do not. And this actually is the interest of this paper, to determine the possible factors for the adoption of input credit in the tobacco contract farming. So as he said, we used the data. We conducted a survey in 2012 to cover a sample of 300 smallholder farmers. And the sampling procedures used was multi-stage. But in that stage, we used a simple random sampling to obtain those farmers of interest. But then we supplemented the information with the qualitative approach, using open questions to enrich the quantitative results. And this is the conceptual framework and estimation strategies. For this paper, we actually used logit model because of the binary choice that these farmers faced. So we thought the logit model would be the appropriate one. Of course, you may also use probit, but we would prefer this logit model. And then this is the conceptual framework. From the literature, we could establish those 7 variables. Yeah, these were in the literature, they are hypothesized to be the factors that would lead into adoption of agro input credit. So we could test them using the logit model and see how significant some of them are in explaining the adoption of input credit. So this is just the description of the variables. Yep. And then here are the econometrics results, where except for farm experience and the indicator for wealth, the WMCBL and the education variable, the other variables were hypothesized to have two-way directions, positive or negative. But education was hypothesized to be positive influence, and the farm experience and the variable which measures wealth was hypothesized to have a negative impact. Then we are saying here that we used the age square variable to account for a potentially non-linear relationship between age and household head on the adoption of input credit. So we now have the interpretation of the results before us. As you can see, the off-farm income positively influences adoption. Maybe I should go to the, what do they tell us now? For example, the off-farm income, its significance and the positive influence told us that liquid farmers may have confidence on repayment, so perhaps they are likely to go for the input credit. But also the total farm size and the variable for wealth, that is all made of concrete blocks, that was used as a measure to show whether a household is somehow rich or poor in rural areas. Then the other like 5 variables were insignificant. So I think you have read that. But also we went for the qualitative results, because we could probe more to see what was actually the reasons now qualitatively. So we could realize that informal lending opportunities available in the area, the nature itself of the tobacco contract farming, a need for independent farming, and no need for input credit actually were also established as the reasons for not going into an input credit system. And here, and you can see their explanations there. So we conclude that from the quantitative results, we still need a follow-up survey that captures adoption variables over time, maybe using longitudinal data or panel data. And future research perhaps may include other personal variables where possible, which are empirically or theoretically known to influence adoption decision, because perhaps the variables we have used would not be, were not sufficient enough to address this one. And then related to qualitative findings, we are saying that the nature of contract farming at present may distort the fundamental farmer's dream, which is actually to enhance their incomes, productivity, and market access through contract farming. So the nature, I think, should be a little bit relooked at in order to address the challenges that are facing smallholder farmers. But again, we are putting that the no formal lending institutions willing to provide loans to farmers. So informal lending institutions need to be encouraged by allowing them a conducive business operation environment to serve farmers who would not like to be tied up with contractual system. Because there are those who say they don't want to be in the contract. They don't want to be in contract, or even if they're in contract, they don't want to take input on credit. So I think they may be allowed to find other ways. Also, the model of contract farming is agreed to have an improved vertical coordination, because we believe that through this model, a farmer, intermediary, and the firms, then the intermediaries plays a paramount role in strengthening the negotiation between farmers, particularly price and quality negotiation between the farmers and the buyers. And then the government should relook at the concept of independent farming, because now how it is, all farmers has to be registered and they have to produce under contract. Otherwise, they cannot sell. So the market is always feasible if you are in contract. So then we are saying the government should look on this concept clearly. Yeah, then thank you for listening.
I'm in braids, as you said. My name is Joyce Alaroke. I come from Uganda, and I'm doing the MSc Project Planning and Management. I could say I am a farmer by birth, because in Africa you're born a farmer. And well, for a couple of years I've worked with Danida in an agricultural program. I just have a few comments or questions. I don't know how you're going to take them. One quick thing is, in your model of contract farming, to what extent do you really engage with the farmers, perhaps in the planning or the decision making, or at what stages do you get involved with them to get things done? From your presentation, you say one of the problems that the farmers have got with the contract is that they do not take part, or probably they're not comprehensively consulted in the whole thing. And then I could relate that to another challenge that you posed about, side selling. My experience last year when I was doing a survey that's around March with the marketing program that Danida is supporting is that the contracting bit is so much faced with the challenge of farmers selling away the products before what you agree to sell, because they are faced with so many challenges. For instance, if my child is sick, I am a mother, and I know that the supposed company that is going to buy from me is going to take forever to pay me, and then somebody comes and is willing to give me quick money to take my child to the hospital, I would rather, give away. So doesn't that then sort of compromise your objectives? And then the other thing that I have experienced with tobacco growing back home, the Danida program works in the West Nile region that is closer to Congo, and BAT has done a lot of what the parliamentarians are now calling havoc there because of tobacco growing. And the reason is that the push to grow tobacco so that the farmers earn a lot of money has undermined the abilities of the families to grow food for themselves to eat. And at one moment it became a very serious issue in the parliament, and the parliamentarians were asking actually some of the donors if back home they eat tobacco, because the farmers are now we're now growing tobacco and we're not cultivating the sweet potatoes and name them the food that they have to eat. My concern is, have you sort of come across that? That is a Ugandan perspective. I don't know, I've never been to Tanzania, but how have you tried to strike a balance between, the cash crops and the food crops that the communities need? And then
final one.
Yes, one final one. I love sharing this story. When I was doing my survey last year, I asked a woman, why are you not planting the rice in lines as you're taught during extension? And she said, my daughter, I have only one grandchild, and when you want me to grow in lines, I need more labor because somebody has to stand on the other side of the field and we have to pull the string so that then we can do, the line planting. And then the other thing is, I met another guy because we have a water program. We had a water program as well. And he said, you know what, that well dried up because when the engineers came here to talk to us, they refused to listen to our advisors, because we knew that constructing a spring here, there's something that they call like a boiling eye, meaning it keeps rotating, and we know how these things move. They didn't listen to us, and therefore the program failed. In all, what am I trying to say? To what extent do we engage the people that we support with our interventions? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Our colleague front here.
Thank you, Lawrence Cockcroft. I just want to make a quick comment on the fact that we're looking at Tanzania in a long-term perspective, amongst other things. And it's fair to say, I think, that contract farming, as it's now being introduced, is really a response to ultra-liberalization that occurred from the 80s onwards. So if we go back in time to the 50s and 60s, what we were really talking about in Tanzania was essentially a cooperative-based system, and processing, marketing, and purchase was done mainly through cooperatives. Those cooperatives, as everybody in this room knows, collapsed more or less and have still remained collapsed under the extreme pressure for liberalization, essentially, in my view, from the donors. But what we're talking about now is a very haphazard response to a situation in which institutions for the purpose of assisting farmers have collapsed. So let's remember that this is very much a patchwork. I've been involved in the last 5 years working with the Tanzania Cotton Board, trying to promote contract farming, which is their agenda. That has been almost a complete failure because of political pressures in certain districts, such as Bariadi, against contract farming. And quite frankly, the central government, represented by the Cotton Board, has been quite unable to introduce contract farming, which initially was announced even at presidential level, certainly at Prime Minister level, and then rolled back. So why has this proved so difficult? Not in the context that have been introduced this afternoon, but in a broader context. And I submit, and none of the speakers from Mzumbe have dealt with this, that one of the extreme limitations of contract farming is that if you don't announce a pre-planting price, then you have extreme difficulties in getting farmers to collaborate, which is not surprising. So obviously stronger farmers who reckon that they can negotiate their own price are not going to be part of the arrangements. So I would appreciate a comment from the speakers on whether or not they think that a pre-planting price is an essential part of a contract. And I think I'm right in saying, this is certainly true in cotton, that that is not part of the package at the moment. I didn't see it from the slides anyway. And my final point is that the Minister of Agriculture in Tanzania has considered it necessary to introduce legislation to govern contract farming. I'm not quite sure why that is really. It seems to me that contract farming shouldn't require specific legislation, but I believe that legislation has now been passed, and I'd be interested to know whether or not the speakers think that's going to prove to be a useful initiative.
Yeah, thank you. Very good questions, comments. So I would wish to take round. Anybody wishes to tackle any part of the comments, questions, go, but make it concise. Our time is not with us.
Yeah, thank you so much to all the commentators and the last question. Starting with David, I think by the fact that both producers of sunflower and tobacco are relatively small farmers, we can say, matter of fact, that this intervention, therefore, of enabling them to make a living, be able to produce by allowing them access to inputs, also credit, I think we can say they are, in my opinion, poor. Joyce, to what extent do contractors engage with farmers? I think in the case of sunflower, I did mention that I think this is a fairly good example where it is not sort of contact from above as such, but rather the farmers and the potential contractors through this NGO, they are made to realize their sort of simultaneous constraints, and therefore by responding to each other's I think they are indeed involved. And participation is not necessary. I mean, you have to have confidence on the system. The issue of side selling, yes, that happens more not on tobacco but on sunflower. But they are addressing this. The contractors, I think, they go a mile ahead by trying to meet those intermediate cash needs of the farmers. So they also play. You can take some kind of corporate. You know, the issue of such selling, I think, will continue. Food with us. Yeah, I think it's true that particularly in the case of, for sunflower, it's not a problem. Currently, sunflower is intercropped with maize, currently, although there is a move towards making sunflower, a monocrop because it pays more now than probably growing food and sell. But obviously the issue of food security is quite an important issue at the household level. But on the case of tobacco and maize for that matter, I think the farmers have made an attempt, and through, of course, sensitization, put aside land particularly for production of food, of maize, and of course have some plot allocated for tobacco. Lawrence took important questions. You said that on the predetermined price. Yes, in the case of tobacco, the provision for contract, they do have a predetermined price, so that runs into the problem. But in the case of sunflower, I think the farmers themselves, they wouldn't go for predetermined price just in case, the spot market price will be higher. So what they agreed was that they would pay at least not less than spot market price. If anything, they'll be given kind of a premium for, of course, producing the right sunflower using the improved seed. With regards to the issue of cooperatives, I think the cooperatives still have a role. Like in the case of tobacco, I think the cooperative, they are now involved. I think this is a new role since 2009. They've now taken the role from the private companies of supplying inputs to the farmers, and they are the spokesmen actually on negotiating on behalf of the farmers with the private firms. In the case of sunflower, of course, that's a problem because they're just starting. They don't have any sort of, this is one of those used to be a minor crop, so there is no kind of a farmer organization.
Registration of contract farmer. Sharia.
Okay, I think I just need to respond to David's question. I'm not sure that the others were directly what I was talking about. There were two. Could the scheme be pro-poor? Is what you were saying, Dakawa maybe.
I think what I had in mind was, could you think of any of these interventions that would benefit poorer farmers more than richer farmers, rather than, they might benefit poor farmers, but my impression is that in general, these kind of interventions are more likely to benefit the richer farmers more than the poorer farmers.
I think the intention of USAID in funding the rehabilitation of the Dakawa rice farm certainly was very much framed around a narrative of the small farmer, and the small farmer being empowered through these larger schemes to work cooperatively, to get access to credits, get access to training. And that, on the face of it, appeared to be what they were certainly showing. And they had lots of case studies of small farmers. When we started to dig deeper, this backstory of the bigger farmer came out, and people within USAID saying, no, we know that the small farmer is a labourer is essentially for the larger political interests. So there was huge elite capture going on, I think, that wasn't immediately apparent. Now, that may be a specific problem of Dakawa because it's got a long political history, and it may be possible to avoid some of that if you're starting afresh, such as they're attempting to do in Kilombero. But we know that, you know, all the water about institutional capture within water, the literature that talks about that shows that the more powerful tend to get hold of the whatever institution it is if they can see some benefit from it. On the other case, the Choma, where the small farmers seem to be using the water quite productively for food production, there was actually sort of anti-poor intervention by the government from the attempt to evict the farmers from the mountain, and then this feeling that, well, maybe we could tolerate them for a while if they promised to behave themselves in the sort of farming that they were doing, but ultimately we'll have to get rid of them, rather than sort of addressing the bigger problems about the use of water and how you might actually do some trade-offs or try and sort out this problem about competing usage. So I think, yeah, definitely sort of more anti-poor on that side. Want to add anything? No? Okay.
Oh, just a point on, I think, Lawrence, on the legislation on contract farming. In my opinion, and I think looking ahead, this is only meant to set up a framework that will guide this particular approach rather than making just open. Like, for example, in the case of tobacco, for example, there is an act that guides the formation of these contracts. And in a way, we see this particular kind of contract working relatively well, I think. And I think as we think ahead, where there'll be sort of private firm coming into Agric and wanting to use outgrowers, for example, and so on and so forth, I think there has to be some kind of a framework to make sure that at least farmers are, or all stakeholders are protected for that matter. This is my personal opinion.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure we will be breaking in a few minutes, but we can take extra one round so that we can, our colleague on the back is on the middle, and the last one.
Thank you, Michael McGowan. Could I pursue a little bit more about the cooperatives? There have been several references to primary cooperatives, even cooperative union, and it's now been mentioned that cooperatives are sort of patchwork compared with what they were in the 80s. I wonder if you could say which products we are talking about, which particular services, whether we're talking about production, whether we're talking about marketing, access to finance. And I think Joseph suggested that there's a bit of a renewal and some success here. How extensive in terms of the economy is the development of cooperatives currently? Are we talking about 5%, 50%? How much, just to get some idea of the scale of what's suggested is a bit of a renewal, and in what areas?
Anthony Elman, just linking this discussion to this morning's session. We talked this morning of the large amounts of land and water resources which are being leased to foreign investors, and excluding small farmers from both land and water. Do you see an opportunity for contract farming links between smallholders in the areas around the areas being occupied by and managed by foreign investors, as contracted outgrowers producing the crops and getting inputs and credit from the core company and access to the markets which the core companies are providing?
Thank you. My name is Enoch Young from University of Bradford, and originally come from Kenya. My question actually is directed to Professor Kuzilwa, Professor Kuzilwa. Having heard the information you have provided with regards to contract farming, and that's similar maybe to what my sister said here, you mentioned the challenge you have is in not the government not giving you support at the grassroots level. And seeing 50 years after independence, do you think all is the institution feeling that the government is not giving them enough support so that agriculture can be realized as one of the main sources of poverty alleviation? Because if you take an example, for instance, there used to be Kilombero Farm, I think there was sugarcane. You know, those old days, they were prospering. You could hear the first president of the country actually promoting agriculture through the radio. You could see a lot of activities. What is the university doing actually? You may also recall it, University of Sokoine actually was, the key sector was to promote agriculture. What are you doing as an institution to see that, or what strategy are you employing to overcome these challenges, which of course have already been highlighted by some of the presenters? Because basically, is it the way where the policy is coming from the ministry to the university, or from the university, which is a research institution, advising the government over the right thing to be done? So what are you doing to address that, or those challenges, which are eminent actually? And I think you have already identified that the government is not giving you support to way forward. Where you are in your slide, yes, challenges from the government and the government not supporting you. You see back to your slide, you will see something of that kind. Thank you.
Yeah, if there's any other question on water, then we can take the last question on the back. Looks like people are satisfied with water.
Dan Robertson, Manchester. Very briefly, and I'm sorry if this question was asked while I was out. Do we have any data on how contract farming affects the livelihoods of different farmers?
Yeah, thank you. Then looks like one presenter is on the spotlight, so welcome.
The first question from Mike about the cooperatives. I may not generalize, but to talk about this particular one, the tobacco, which I think is the one we're working on. I think in a way, and when it comes to organizing input access, but also acting as an intermediary for accessing credit, I think the primary cooperative societies, working in collaboration with the cooperative union. You know, there is the Western Cooperative Union, which of course pull all these other primary cooperative societies. I think, in my opinion, it worked very well. Of course, now there is a bit of complaints, of course, by the farmers themselves, looking at the efficiency at which the current system involving the primary cooperative is compared to when the improvisation was done directly by the company. I think this one is the role that the pieces they wanted to, I think, to intervene. So it's not working very well, but I think for tobacco, in a way, there are some successes that have been realized. With regards to the rest of the economy, I think I'm not competent at this stage to comment on that one. Anthony, on usage of outgrowers, this is happening already. I think in the case of sugarcane, for example, in Kilombero, where you have outgrowers complementing production of sugarcane from the satellite, you know, from the companies, and I envisage this may continue. Probably there are some, I think, attempts now to involve the large, both domestic and foreign investors, to come and engage in large-scale production of various products, agricultural produce. I would imagine that it should be possible to involve the or link up with the smallholders surrounding those investment and be able to support them somehow, meet also quality standard, and provide them with some inputs, probably as part of the responsibilities, corporate responsibility of of those investors. Enoch, what I said was not that the government is not providing support to the universities, but I said there is inadequate involvement of the government at all levels, and particularly at the local government level, in support of the operation of the contract farming. So, for example, we had cases in the case of sunflower, where the officials at the level of the local government were not very proactive in terms of mobilizing, for example, smallholders. Where this has been the case, the contract farming have not been that successful, as opposed to cases where the local government officials were proactive in mobilizing smallholders to participate in this contract farming and therefore be able to access, for example, the improved seeds at credit and be able to enhance their productivity. So what we do research. It obviously will make some recommendation, will produce some briefs to the government. But there is one thing that we're going to do now in this research, and that is beginning October this year. And this is in support, I think, of another intervention, both by government and Danida, on the support to sunflower producers in the central region. And that is, we're going to have some kind of an experiment identifying those constraints that are hindering attainment of sort of potential technical efficiencies, and be able to support those interventions through research and follow-up. And I think from our research, we should be able to therefore inform or feedback to the relevant stakeholders, including government, on what works and what does not work. So our role as a university, I think, is not really to make direct interventions, but rather to do research, informed research, and enable the government to reach informed decisions on policy. Yeah.
Livelihoods. Which one? Rockington asked about if you had any data on livelihoods, whether the contract farming had improved livelihoods.
What we have done in this particular research, I mean, we are only about 3 years now. We are collecting some. We have some in the data that we have. Of course, we did a cross-section survey, and we have received some funding to be able to do some kind of a longitudinal study and be able to collect some data over time in order to see whether indeed contract farming is improving livelihood by looking at some of those indicators. But as of now, and for the data that we had, we have been able to establish, at least for the sunflower, that farmers who are engaged in contract farming have relatively significantly higher levels of income and than those who are not involved. And we imagine with high level of incomes, they should be able to have also a high level of welfare, having maybe better houses, assets, and be able to meet other household needs. But at this stage, I think we have not been able to say, I think, concretely whether contract farming has indeed improved livelihood. We should be able to say that, I think, as we conduct the second phase of this research.
Yeah, let me, on your behalf, thank the presenters for well-informed presentations they have made. And let me thank all of you. First, bear in mind that this was a session after lunch. I can assure you nobody was caught on the camera sleeping. So don't worry, the camera didn't catch it on. And let me thank the audience for very informed questions you have asked and the comments you have put forward. So let me return the mic to the organizers. I'm sure this is the break time. Thank you so much for being wonderful audience. Thank you so much.
Okay.